Welcome to the notes for section 1.3. By now you should know that you should be in the packet on pages 11 and 12. Remember that whatever I write down, you should also be writing down. First, a look at our objectives and what we're going to talk about today. First, we are going to calculate the midpoint of a segment given the segment endpoints, and we will talk about what a midpoint is. Then we are going to calculate the endpoint of a segment given one of the endpoints in the midpoint. And last, we're going to calculate the length of a segment, or the distance between 2 points. So first, we have two definitions that we need to write down. So a midpoint divides a segment into congruent segments. Divides a segment into two congruent segments. So writing an example, if this is our segment, here's our midpoint, it creates two congruent segments. So the two parts are going to be equal. A segment bisector is a little more general. It's a point, line, or array that intersects a segment at its midpoint. Okay, so we have some segment, it has a midpoint. We know it's a midpoint because it creates two congruent segments. A segment bisector just means that something goes through that midpoint. So a line, array, just that point. So that line that I just drew would be a segment bisector. Bisect just means to cut in half. Cut in half. So that's the non-fancy definition. So maybe write that down. Just means to cut in half. Okay, so we have a few examples we're going to do. Example 1, it says point M is the midpoint of VW. So I'm going to draw that first. So it says I have this VW, and I have some point M. Okay, because it's a midpoint, I've created two congruent segments. Remember that those tick marks mean congruent. Then it says VM is 5x minus 7. So 5x minus 7. Sorry, this should be a 5. Well, my handwriting sometimes is not very good. And then it says MW is 14 minus 2x. And it asks you to find the length of VM. Okay, in order to find VM, we know VM is 5x minus 7, but we really need to know the value of x. Because M is the midpoint, we know that VM and MW are congruent. Congruent means they have the same length. So because of that, we can set them equal. We can set 5x minus 7 equal to 14 minus 2x. Start by adding 2x to both sides. So I get 7x minus 7 equals 14. Adding 7 to both sides, I get 7x equals 21. Dividing by 7, I get x equals 3. Remember, though, that the question asks you to find the length of VM. So I'm not done yet. I need to substitute this back in. So I have 5, x is 3, minus 7. 15 minus 7 is 8, so I get VM equals 8. If VM is 8, that means MW is also going to be 8 because they're congruent. And then VW, this entire thing, if the two parts are 8, VW would be 16. So when you do problems in class, you might be asked for VM, you might be asked for MW, you might be asked for VW. You should be able to find all three. What I would like you to do right now is pause the video and complete problem 2 on your own. Pause the video, complete it on your own, and then when you come back, I will give you the answer. Hopefully you've had a chance to try this one on your own. I'm just going to move the page real quick. Okay, as before, I'm not going to be showing you the work. I'm just going to be giving you the answer. You should have gotten x equals 15. Therefore, RM and MT, are both 84. And RT is 168. Good job if you got those right. If not, I would like you to pause the video and try to see if you can figure out what you did wrong. When you come to class, I'm going to be checking to make sure that you have all the work showing the correct answers. Moving on, we're now going to find the midpoint of a segment. So we're actually going to calculate the coordinates, the x comma y. So first thing is the midpoint formula. I'm going to use m for midpoint. In order to find the midpoint, I add the two x's of the endpoints and divide by 2. I then add the two y's of the endpoints and I divide by 2. So I'm basically just taking an average. Okay, so example 3. It says the endpoints of segment AB are A, which is 1, 2, and B, which is 7, 8. Find the coordinates of the midpoint. Okay, so in order to find the midpoint, I'm first going to write the formula. It's always just a good idea to start with a formula to give us some direction. Okay, so I need to add my x's. Remember, x is always the first point in the coordinate. So I'm going to take 1, I'm going to add 7 and divide by 2. Second point is always the y. Okay, 1 add 7 is 8, but 8 divided by 2 is 4. 2 add 8 is 10, 10 divided by 2 is 5. So my midpoint is 4, 5. Example 4 is very, very similar. It says find the midpoint of the segment with the given endpoints. So right now I want you to take your time, pause the video, and do this one on your own, please. Okay, hopefully you tried this one on your own. You should have gotten -3/2, 15/2. I prefer fractions, but if you put those into decimals, you would have gotten -1.5 and then 7.5. If you did not get those correct, go back, look at example 3, and redo example 4. When you come to class, I'm going to be making sure that you have this one done and that you have all the work for it. Okay, so at this point, we have finished the first objective. We've calculated a midpoint, I mean. Now we're going to be calculating an endpoint given one of the midpoints. So that's example 5 on page 12. So if you could flip. Okay, so here we go. Example 5. It says one endpoint of a segment. So I'm going to draw us a picture. One endpoint is 3, -1. The midpoint is -4, 2. Find the other endpoint. Okay, so this is a midpoint, so I'm going to put the tick marks. So I'm looking for this point over here, which is x, y. Given that I have an endpoint and a midpoint. Remember that to find a midpoint, you have to take the average of the endpoints. You add them and divide by 2. Remember that these are our two endpoints. Okay, so my midpoint, my -4, 2, is going to be equal to the average of my endpoints. So this is different than examples 3 and 4. You're not going to go about this the same way. So my two x's in this case are 3 and x. So I'm going to take 3, add x, and then I divide by 2. And my y's are -1 and y. So I'm going to add those and divide by 2. Okay, I have an x and a y, so I need two equations. One equation for x and one equation for y. This is my x coordinate, and this is my x coordinate. So I have -4 equals 3 plus x over 2. Okay, this is like -4/1. And now I can multiply. Something like this. Okay, so I have -8 equals 3 plus x. If I subtract 3, I get x equals -11. Okay, I'm going to have to do the same thing for y. Here is my y. Here is my y. So I get 2 equals -1 plus y all over 2. Remember, this is like 2/1. Okay, now I can multiply. 2 multiplied by 2 is 4. And then I get -1 plus y, because remember, anytime you multiply by 1, it just stays the same. Adding 1 to the other side, I get y equals 5. Okay, last thing, I need to write this as an ordered pair. So my answer is -11, 5, x, y. So that's the other endpoint. Okay, so that was midpoint. So first we calculated the midpoint. Then I gave you a midpoint and you calculated one of the endpoints. Now we're moving on to the distance formula. This one's a little trickier. So if we could write this down, the distance is equal to the square root. This time I subtract my x's and then I square it. I subtract my y's and I square it. Once I add those together, I take the square root. This looks really complicated, but it's not that bad. Okay, so for example 6, it says find the length of segment GS, and it gives us the two endpoints. So this is generally what we write. GS, if I don't put a line over the top, it means I'm talking about distance. Sorry, that didn't turn out so good. Okay, so my two x's are -4 and -8. Okay, unlike the midpoint formula, I want to subtract here. Midpoint you add, distance you subtract. So I have -4 subtract -8 squared. My y is -4 still, and then 12. So -4 subtract 12 squared. Remember that subtracting a negative is like adding. So -4 add 8 is just 4. So I have 4 squared add. I'm going to change this to plus a negative. So this is like -16 squared. So this becomes the square root of 16 add 256, which is the square root of 272. Now I need to break this down. I taught you a few different ways in class. I'm going to do the tree. So 272 is 2 and 136, which is 2 and 68, which is 2 and 34. Now the 34 can be broken, sorry, I need to get my pen back. 34 can be broken down to be 2 and 17. 17 is prime, we can't break that down anymore. Looking for pairs, I have a pair of 2's and another pair of 2's, and that 17 is all alone. 1 2 from each pair comes out, 17 stays under the root. So this becomes 4 root 17. That's the length of GS. Anytime it's asking for length, that's just talking about distance formula. So that's distance formula. I know that was a little bit long, but it's not too bad. You have one example to do on your own now. So what I would like you to do is pause the video, try this one on your own, please. Hopefully you had a chance to try this one on your own. What you should have gotten is the square root of 40, which simplifies to be 2 root 10. If that's not what you got, you need to go back and fix your mistake. When you come to class tomorrow, I'm going to be checking to make sure that you have the work completely finished and correct. So what we did in this video is we calculated the midpoint, we calculated an endpoint, and then we calculated the length using the distance formula. When you come to class, we will be doing some examples together. Thank you.